The morning of March 14th, 1941, broke over RAF Kenley with a chill that bit through even the thickest leather flight jackets. On the tarmac, Beatrice Schilling stood alone, watching a young Hurricane pilot climb into his cockpit. He was tense, alert, every muscle ready for the deadly ballet of air combat he might not survive. She was 32 years old, 6 years deep into the Royal Aircraft establishment, and yet she had no official solution to the problem that was claiming British lives at an alarming rate. The Luftwaffe had sent wave after wave of Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds across the Channel. That week alone, 43 German fighters had engaged British squadrons in 27 dogfights. The results were grim: 14 Hurricanes down, 9 Spitfires lost, and countless pilots barely clinging to life. Every report, every interview, every maintenance log told the same story. British pilots would spot a German fighter, dive to attack, and then nothing. The engines would stall, power gone, seconds that felt like hours. The German fighters would escape, or worse, circle back and pour bullets into helpless planes. The problem was physics, simple yet lethal. When a Spitfire or Hurricane dove steeply, fuel surged in the carburetor's float chamber. The engine starved, died for a heartbeat and a half, about 1.5 seconds. In combat, 1.5 seconds was fatal. That was enough for a Bf 109 to close 300 yards and open fire. The German pilots never faced this. Their Daimler-Benz engines injected fuel directly. No float chamber, no stalling. They could dive, climb, roll, invert, everything the RAF pilots struggled to do without losing a single heartbeat of power. The advantage was deadly, and the British were paying for it with blood. For 11 months, Schilling had obsessed over the problem. Rolls-Royce engineers were working on a pressure carburetor, a permanent fix, but it wouldn't be ready until 1943 or 1944. Every day, young men climbed into Spitfires and Hurricanes, knowing the engines designed to save them might instead end their lives. She had read every accident report, interviewed every surviving pilot, and ran countless tests. She knew the limits, the failures, and the stakes. That morning, Squadron Leader Davies walked past her. 24 years old, 41 combat missions under his belt, 3 confirmed kills. Twice in the last month, he had narrowly survived engine failures during dives. Schilling nodded at him. He returned the gesture, probably assuming she was just a secretary or an assistant. He didn't know she was the woman who might save his life that very day. In her leather satchel, she carried a tiny, unassuming piece of brass, a washer, simple yet revolutionary. 6 weeks of bench testing at the Royal Aircraft establishment had shown it could prevent the deadly engine stalls. But bench tests weren't the same as combat. Combat was 300 miles per hour, negative G-forces that pinned pilots against their harnesses. Life or death measured in fractions of a second. She walked to her Norton motorcycle, her mind racing through calculations, fuel flow, float chamber dynamics, negative G moments. Every number aligned on paper, but not in the chaos of the sky. The smallest miscalculation, the tiniest error, could kill the pilot or ruin her career. She knew the regulations. Unauthorized modifications could mean court-martial, prison, disgrace. But she also knew the alternative: pilots dying needlessly, their deaths preventable. By noon, the first test would tell her whether she had created a miracle or a tragedy. Sergeant William Cooper, a loyal mechanic who owed her trust and respect, waited. The Hurricane's engine roared as it warmed, the vibrations rattling her bones. Cooper disconnected the fuel line, slipped the washer into place, and welded it carefully. 60 seconds. Invisible, unless you knew where to look. A single, precise addition that might change the course of the air war. Squadron Leader Davies climbed into the cockpit, unaware that a small brass disc would determine whether he lived or died. The Hurricane lifted off, and Schilling tracked it through binoculars as it climbed steadily, joining 2 more Hurricanes on patrol. Her pulse thumped in rhythm with the roar of the engines. The first real test began the moment they reached enemy territory. Minutes felt like hours. The radio remained silent, every second stretched with possibility and danger. Then, a crackle. 3 Hurricanes inbound, 2 minutes out. Relief and tension collided. Schilling watched as Davies and his section returned, engines purring perfectly, aircraft intact. The first dive. Full power sustained. The BF 109 seconds had no advantage. Davy's smile broke through the tension, a rare sight among pilots. "Best the Merlin's ever run," he told Cooper. "Not a hiccup." Schilling exhaled. One pilot survived today because of a small, brilliant idea, one washer, one moment of courage to defy regulations for the sake of life. That day, the RAF took the first step toward reclaiming the sky from the Luftwaffe. Word of the washer spread like wildfire. Other squadrons demanded it, pilots insisted on it, and within days, British skies were filled with aircraft no longer at the mercy of physics. Schilling's simple 50-cent metal washer had turned Spitfires into legends, saving 2,100 pilots in the months that followed. This was the moment when ingenuity, courage, and desperation collided. One woman, one small component, and a nation's pilots began to fight with confidence instead of fear. The war would rage on, but the skies over Britain now belonged to those who dared to innovate, to challenge convention, and to believe that even the smallest solution could change history. The days following that first flight were tense and electric. Schilling moved through the airfields like a quiet storm, her leather satchel clinking softly with the remaining brass washers. Every squadron she visited carried the same haunted fear in their eyes, the memory of friends lost to engine failure, the terror of diving at 400 miles per hour, the knowledge that one miscalculation could mean death. She didn't have to explain much. The pilots instinctively understood that this small piece of brass might be the difference between life and death. At Biggin Hill, the busiest fighter station in 11 Group, the airfield was alive with constant activity. Spitfires and Hurricanes lined the tarmac, engines idling, mechanics shouting over the roar, fuel trucks rattling past. Pilots climbed in and out of cockpits, checking guns, instruments, and controls with ritual precision. Schilling oversaw the installation personally, inspecting every weld, every connection, every small detail. Each restrictor had to be perfect. One flawed weld at 20,000 feet could starve an engine completely. Flight Lieutenant James Lacey watched her with curiosity. 41 missions under his belt, he'd experienced engine failures in dives twice already. "How can a washer do all that?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. Schilling smiled faintly. She explained in simple terms: fuel physics, float chambers, negative G effects. Lacey's eyes widened with understanding and admiration. "Brilliant simplicity," he muttered to himself. Within hours, 4 more Hurricanes were fitted. Each installation took 12 tense minutes, a delicate dance between mechanics' hands and the fragile engines. Then came the first real patrols with the newly modified aircraft. Pilots climbed, formation tight, eyes scanning the skies for the dark silhouettes of BF 109 seconds. Schilling waited, heart in her throat, as the patrols disappeared into the horizon. 40 minutes passed. Radio silence stretched into agonizing minutes. Then, a crackle. 3 aircraft inbound, all accounted for. Relief swept through her, mingled with disbelief. Davy's Hurricane led the formation, engine flawless, maneuvers executed perfectly. He had pressed the dive, the same maneuver that had killed or crippled so many of his comrades without hesitation. The brass washer had worked. Word spread faster than she could have imagined. By March 18th, every squadron commander in 11 Group wanted the washer installed immediately. Schilling fielded calls from stations she had never visited before. Could she bring more restrictors? How fast could they be manufactured? Each call carried the urgency of life and death. The RAF needed every pilot flying, every engine reliable, and she was suddenly the linchpin of survival. Rolls-Royce ramped up production. Within days, hundreds of restrictors were ready. Schilling assembled a team, 3 engineers from Farnborough and 2 trusted civilian mechanics. Together, they would tour the stations, fitting every Hurricane and Spitfire with the life-saving washer. No aircraft could be grounded. The Battle of Britain may have technically ended, but German fighters still prowled the Channel daily. Every plane in the air had to be combat-ready. At Biggin Hill, installation crews worked 12-hour shifts, welding the washers into place, testing for leaks, rejecting anything that didn't meet strict specifications. Pilots watched with a mix of hope and skepticism. "Can one washer really fix something so deadly?" they asked. By the end of the first day, Every pilot who had flown a modified aircraft reported flawless performance. Full power maintained through dives, no stalls, no hesitation. Confidence returned where fear had once ruled. The nickname, Miss Schilling's Orifice, began circulating among pilots, a mix of respect and British humour. Even Sir Stanley Hooker, chief engineer at Rolls-Royce, chuckled at the moniker. Schilling didn't mind. She understood how men coped with stress, how humour could help them remember, and most importantly, how it could save lives. By the end of March, over 2,100 Merlin engines across Britain had been fitted with her restrictors. Every operational squadron, every training unit, every aircraft in reserve had been modified. The tactical advantage the Luftwaffe had relied on engine stalls during dives vanished almost overnight. German intelligence noticed it. Reports began describing RAF pilots executing aggressive diving attacks without hesitation, closing in on BF 109 seconds with deadly efficiency. The statistics were staggering. In March, before the restrictor, RAF fighters experienced engine failures in 38% of diving attacks. British pilots were forced to break off pursuit or die trying. By April, that number dropped to just 0.4%. Losses plummeted while enemy kills skyrocketed. Squadron commanders credited the washer as a key factor. Pilots flew with newfound aggression, diving fearlessly, pressing attacks that would have been suicidal weeks before. Flight Lieutenant Robert Stanford Tuck, one of the RAF's finest, spoke of the change in combat. 4 times before, engine failure had nearly cost him his life. After the installation of Miss Schilling's Orifice, he pressed every dive with confidence, shooting down multiple BF 109 seconds in May and June. The washer had given pilots something far more valuable than mechanical reliability. It gave them the courage to fight without hesitation. The modification spread beyond fighter command. Coastal Command requested it for their fighters. Bomber Command wanted it for training aircraft, and the Fleet Air Arm inquired for carrier-based fighters. Schilling coordinated production with Rolls-Royce, ensuring a steady supply. By June, 1,000 restrictors were rolling off the production line every week, keeping the RAF's fighters ready for war. It was simple, elegant, and deadly effective. One small, 50-cent piece of brass had transformed Britain's air defence, preserving thousands of lives and turning Spitfires into legends. The pilots trusted it, the ground crews maintained it, and the Luftwaffe faced a foe no longer hampered by engine weaknesses. By mid-1941, Miss Schilling's Orifice had become more than a mechanical fix. It was a symbol of survival, ingenuity, and quiet heroism. Pilots no longer approached dives with fear, no longer measured each second by the deadly limits of their carburetors. Now, they climbed with purpose, trusting their Merlin engines to deliver full power at every maneuver, and attacking the Luftwaffe with the confidence that had once been unimaginable. The impact was immediate. RAF records show the dramatic shift. In March, 47 Hurricanes and Spitfires lost to combat, 61 German aircraft destroyed, a near-even ratio. After the restrictor was widely installed, losses dropped to 29 British aircraft, while 94 enemy fighters were shot down. The kill-to-loss ratio had more than doubled, a measurable testament to one woman's ingenuity. Even more remarkable was the psychological change in the pilots. Flight Lieutenant Tuck and others described a newfound boldness in engagements. They pressed attacks they had once abandoned mid-dive. The fear that had gripped a generation of RAF pilots melted into decisive action. The Luftwaffe, so used to exploiting the float chamber weakness, found British aircraft diving and climbing with flawless engines, closing distances before the German pilots even realized the danger. The modification wasn't permanent. The pressure carburetor was still under development at Rolls-Royce and wouldn't be ready until 1943. But Miss Schilling's Orifice bought precious time. It kept pilots alive when the stakes were highest. Older aircraft continued to fly, with the washer installed long after the pressure carburetor began production. Pilots trusted it, ground crews knew how to maintain it, and no one questioned a solution that worked. Beyond fighter command, the washer spread like wildfire. Bomber Command and Coastal Command integrated the restrictors into their fleets. Carrier-based fighters received them. Training aircraft were fitted to ensure the next generation of pilots would survive long enough to reach the front lines. In total, 2,100 Merlin engines were modified, each one a lifeline. The human story was as powerful as the mechanical one. Schilling, a woman in a male-dominated field, had defied convention, risked her career, and saved lives on a massive scale. Ground crews across southern England respected her expertise, even if they didn't fully understand the calculations behind it. Pilots called her innovation a miracle in brass, and her name began circulating quietly, a legend forming in the wings of every airfield. By the summer of 1941, the RAF had reclaimed much of the air advantage it had feared lost. Luftwaffe after-action reports noted a disturbing trend. British pilots no longer stalled in dives, and diving attacks were far more effective. German intelligence began to sense that the advantage they once had vanished overnight. What they didn't know was that it had all come down to a simple 50-cent piece of brass, engineered, tested, and installed by a woman determined to save her country's pilots. For Beatrice Schilling, it was never about fame or recognition. It was about ensuring that the next time a young pilot climbed into a Spitfire or Hurricane, he returned home alive. Her restrictor wasn't a glamorous invention, it was a lifeline, and history would later measure its impact not in headlines, but in thousands of lives saved and countless victories secured in the skies above Britain. The Battle of Britain had ended, but the war continued, and the skies remained dangerous. Yet with every dive pressed, every maneuver executed without fear of engine failure, Miss Schilling's orifice proved itself again and again. It became standard equipment, a silent guardian in the heart of the Merlin engine. RAF pilots, flying with confidence and precision, honoured her brilliance without ever needing to see her name. Years later, historians would marvel at how a small, precisely machined washer changed the course of aerial combat. Rolls-Royce engineers questioned whether the future pressure carburetor was even necessary, but Schilling knew it was only a stopgap. The permanent solution would come later, but for now, she had given the RAF the one thing every pilot needed above all else, the certainty that their engines would not betray them when life depended on it. Her story is a reminder that sometimes the smallest ideas have the biggest impact. One woman, one simple piece of brass, and a nation's pilots lived to fight another day. Spitfires soared higher, dives were pressed deeper, and British skies were defended with renewed courage. In the end, it wasn't just engineering, it was bravery, ingenuity, and the quiet heroism of a woman who refused to let her pilots die needlessly. If you enjoyed this story of courage and innovation, hit the like button, share this video to honor unsung heroes of the war, and subscribe for more incredible WWII stories. History is full of forgotten brilliance, let's make sure it's never lost.